The Army announces an inquiry into the 2009 disappearance of Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Wait, now? They're doing that now?
I see questions being raised, big questions on the right and the left. Did we do the right thing in terms of bringing Bo Bergdahl home?
Not in this case, no, absolutely not.
Either we bring them home to a ticker tape parade or to a court-martial, whatever, but we bring them home.
Or both.
Or both.
She's an exceptional candidate. She has an extraordinary amount of credibility on national security issues.
I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm.
I can't wait to serve with her. The next U.S. Senator from Florida, from Iowa, Joni Ernst.
The Seattle City Council passed an ordinance that bumps the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. That's the highest in the nation.
It is widely expected that the president there, Bashar al-Assad, is going to win in what the West is referring to this as a sham election.
Quite honestly, beyond the Syrian regime, nobody in the region is taking this election seriously.
Bergdahl's freedom wasn't free. You see, Obama negotiated Bergdahl's return in exchange for 5 Taliban detainees held at Guantanamo Bay. He can't release these guys. We were this close to charging them with something.
When an American soldier deserts, should that change the lengths we go to save them? That's the question echoing from Capitol Hill to the Pentagon to the ranks of men and women defending our country. President Obama is in Poland today, nominally focusing on our relationships in Eastern Europe. But the big questions seem to be about Sergeant Bo Bergdahl.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop. We don't condition that.
But new revelations are raising the political stakes of holding that line. The U.S. Army is readying an inquiry into the circumstances of Sergeant Bergdahl's disappearance. And men and women who served alongside the sergeant in Afghanistan are now sharing tales of a young soldier that was anything but loyal to the war effort.
We were all in it together over there, and he broke that bond by leaving us. You're just going to let these guys go for somebody who you're already saying you know walked away. That's just not right.
That's because soldiers who served with Bergdahl say he left his weapons behind and slipped out of his camp in the middle of the night, leaving months of searching that may have resulted in the deaths of other soldiers. An email home to his parents, quoted by Michael Hastings for the Rolling Stone, chronicled what might have been going through Bergdahl's head. Take a look at this. He said, "I'm ashamed to even be American. The horror of the self-righteous arrogance that they thrive in, it is all revolting." So does that change how we treat Sergeant Bergdahl? Here with a military perspective is General Barry McCaffrey, former Gulf War Division commander and an MSNBC military analyst. Thank you so much, General, for coming back.
Yeah, good to be with you.
If a soldier deserts, should that change the resources we put into finding him or her?
Well, first of all, desertion has a very precise legal meaning. So does AWOL, all these Uniform Code of Military Justice charges. So let's back off that.
So we have to determine whether that's exactly the case. That'll be the subject of this investigation.
Yeah. You know, did he intend to forever absent himself from military control? That's desertion. We almost never charge that. You can't prove it. What is not a new inquiry, factually, is he left his post in a period of armed combat, unarmed, whether it was under the influence of drugs or self-radicalized, or whether he intended to walk free in the mountains or join the Taliban, that will be revealed. But we know he abandoned his post. We know that stopped military operations for a considerable period of time, during which we had troops killed or wounded trying to recover him. And so now we've gotten him back. One can debate the costs of the 5 most dangerous people in our control being released. But I think what bothers people is having our commander-in-chief on television putting a glow of euphoria around the return of this guy, and then followed on with Dr. Susan Rice, who's such a brilliant person, calling him having served with honor and distinction when they knew full well this wasn't the case. Ronan, we've also gone on. Today we had the chairman of the JCS, General Dempsey, issue a statement that essentially says, back off the debate. We got to figure out what's going on.
And one
debate
thing
is
that he
legitimate.
cautioned is, he made a similar point to the point that you made earlier, that this needs to be an internal review. This needs to be subject to the conditions of the Uniform Military Code of Justice. He said, quote, like any American, he is innocent until proven guilty, of course, referring to Sergeant Bergdahl. Our Army's leaders will not look away from misconduct if it occurred. So there's some possibility of discipline here. Do you think Sergeant Bergdahl will be court-martialed?
Well, I don't know. The inquiry will have to decide what the facts were of his mindset will be a legitimate part of inquiry. But look, if the Army doesn't take action, and General Dempsey should not, he's not in the chain of command. He is not a convening authority. The President is. He should not have appeared and contaminated the chain of command's view of this case. But at the end of the day, what we don't want is we don't want Mr. Bergdahl, who did walk away from his post in armed combat, ending up as a medically retired staff sergeant with a check for several $100,000 and a permanent retirement.
Well, you raise a lot of really important questions here, among them the fate of those 5 individuals who have been released from Guantanamo Bay. That's what we're going to turn to next. General Barry McCaffrey, appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
As we mentioned, there is this renewed debate about the release of those prisoners and about America's larger legacy in Afghanistan. This is one of the big points of contention surrounding this story. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is now outside the hospital Sergeant Bergdahl is in Germany. He's following this story for us. He's also, of course, spent years reporting on Afghanistan. Richard, Bergdahl supposedly deserted his post, expressing some very serious, very dark doubts about America's broader role in Afghanistan. Have you sensed any of those sentiments being echoed by other troops?
Sure, I've spoken to many troops over the year who are not happy with the who are not happy with the war, weren't happy with the war, weren't happy with where they were serving. But they didn't walk away from guard duty, leave their weapon behind, and leave the other soldiers who were standing next to them more exposed. It's one thing to be upset with the war and not to re-enlist. It's another, and I think every soldier pretty much will agree with this, to walk away in the middle of an armed situation. This is 2009 in Afghanistan, in a very dangerous area. Clearly lots of enemy fighters in the area, because it didn't take long before he was picked up.
So he knew on some level what he might be getting into in Paktika.
Oh, there's absolutely no way he could have not known what he was getting into. This is a very dangerous area. It's still a dangerous area, frankly. It would have been absolutely clear to any soldier there that if they walked off the base and started, roaming the mountains or whatever the purpose was, that they were going to quickly run into a bad situation.
Richard,
there's no possible way to look at it otherwise.
And in addition to the desertion itself, what kind of questioning of the release of these 5 individuals from Guantanamo Bay are you seeing amongst the military officials and the military personnel you're in touch with?
So, in general, the commanding officers and soldiers we've been speaking to believe that you should go out and rescue American troops, that POWs should be a priority, and that you should go and find them. Pretty much regardless of what they did. Not everyone has to be a hero. And I've spoken to a lot of soldiers who believe that it should be a priority, could be them. But they don't want him to be made into a hero. They don't want to be blamed for his specific disappearance. And they're not happy that militant leaders were released in exchange for him. They saw a young soldier who walked away from his post and cost lives and cost the release of several top Taliban leaders. So in general, no, there's not a lot of satisfaction. There's sympathy with not being for the war, but there's not sympathy for walking away from your post.
And that lack of satisfaction you described as being echoed in a big way in Washington. We're going to turn to that now. Richard Engel, thank you so much for that report. So as we mentioned, this other line of questioning that President Obama faces today is ever more divisive, ever more intense, a firestorm really at this point over the detainees being released for Bergdahl's freedom. Well, let's talk about them for a second. They're the so-called Guantanamo 5. They've been released to the government of Qatar, which says that they're going to be monitored, but the U.S. government has a duty to monitor too. President Obama spoke to that duty earlier today.
We have confidence that we will be in a position to go after them if, in fact, they are engaging in activities that threaten our defenses.
That may not be enough to assuage critics on Capitol Hill, some of them newly inflamed by these allegations about the way in which Bergdahl disappeared.
If it were you, given what you know now, would you have brought him home if you had this choice?
Not under these circumstances.
You would not have.
I would have continued to pursue his release, not under these circumstances. I wouldn't have given the Taliban 4 are serious commanders likely to return to the battlefield.
Joining me from Washington, Rajiv Chandrasekaran, Associate Editor and Senior Correspondent for The Washington Post and an excellent reporter on these issues. Thank you so much for being here, sir. He's also the author of Little America, The War Within the War for Afghanistan. Let's talk about who these men are. It's important to note they're not al-Qaeda, they're Taliban. That's a distinction that we should all be aware of, right?
Indeed. Look, these are, Ronan, these are not good people by any stretch of the imagination. Some of them presided over the slaughter of thousands of their fellow Afghans in the late 90s. And they had some sympathies toward al-Qaeda, but they were not al-Qaeda leaders in and of themselves.
And this idea of negotiating with the Taliban in general, do you think that that's something that is falling out of favor? I remember, back around 2009, Richard Holbrooke ushered in this idea that we should, and indeed for a time his successor, Mark Grossman, was supposedly leading these negotiations for Bergdahl's release. It now seems like it's even more of a taboo. There's this extraordinarily divisive reaction on the Hill. Is there any chance that America will ever accept this idea?
Well, Ronan, this is an issue, you know well from your diplomatic work. But we should remember, yes, it's always been a controversial issue, negotiating with the Taliban, but it's been something that has been supported by the president on down. And it is stated U.S. policy. I mean, unless the majority of Americans in this country want to keep on fighting in Afghanistan for years to come, and all the public opinion polls show that they don't. This war is very unpopular, and there is support for the president's plan to draw down forces significantly and essentially end our presence there by the end of 2016. You've got to find some ways to end elements of this conflict. The Afghan security forces aren't going to be able to fight this all on their own. And we also have to remember, Ronan, that this fits into the broader context of the president wanting to shut down Guantanamo. So this is in part an effort to reduce the population of Guantanamo. Well, I think it's a step that way, and hopefully, I mean, I think my hope in all this is that this is potentially a confidence-building measure between the U.S. government and elements of the Taliban leadership to then move forward to find other elements of discussion that are aimed at reducing the scope of the conflict there.
Rajiv, do you think Qatar can contain these individuals? Are we going to see a security threat from them?
Look, Qatar is a good U.S. ally in that part of the world. They've got a pretty extensive security service. You should also remember that the forward element of a U.S. Central Command is in that part of the world. So we've got a lot of U.S. intelligence people in and around that area. I think between the Qataris and U.S. intelligence services, I think we'll be able to keep an eye on them. Will some of them potentially return to the Taliban fold? Perhaps. There are no guarantees there. Others have. Who is our long-term enemy in Afghanistan? Is it elements of the Taliban, some of whom are seeking some political role in that country, or is it what's left of al-Qaeda and some of the more extremist offshoots of the Taliban who are not associated with these five?
Right. So we shouldn't let our guard down, but it is true that these are not, perhaps, as Senator McCain has said, the hardest of the hardcore. Rajiv Chandrasekaran, appreciate it.
Good to talk to you.
Ahead on RF Daily.